Today, I'm going to show you how to install ComfyUI and generate your first images and videos with AI. ComfyUI is the most popular and powerful user interface for running generative AI models like Stable Diffusion, Flux, or Cog Video X. ComfyUI gives you complete creative control over AI workflows, usually has the latest AI support, and the best part, it is completely free. Thanks to the awesome community of developers and artists, ComfyUI can be used to make just about anything. First, I'm going to show you how to install ComfyUI, and then Nate will show you some basic workflows, some advanced workflows, and some fun ones. I'm super excited. I know you are too. All right, let's go. ComfyUI can look super daunting, but don't worry, because by the end of this video, you'll not only understand what all of this does, but you'll understand how to make your own workflow and customize it. We'll get more into the interface once we have it installed, so let's dive in. The first step is to make sure we have the prerequisites. ComfyUI works on Windows, Mac, and Linux computers. For the best performance, it is recommended to have a graphics card with at least 4 GB of VRAM, but ComfyUI can work using your CPU as well, which we will show later in this video. The first step is to navigate the ComfyUI GitHub page. The GitHub page made by Comfy Anonymous is the official version. You can download directly by clicking here, which will provide you with 1.5 GB 7Z file that you will need to extract. 7Z is a type of archive file which holds both files and folders together, so it's easy to download. But to extract it, you will need a program like 7-zip, or in this case, I will be using WinRAR. I can then simply extract the file which will contain the full install for ComfyUI. To keep things organized, I made a folder on my computer's main disk drive called apps and placed ComfyUI there. ComfyUI is a portable application, which means it doesn't have a traditional installer like most programs or games, and instead runs entirely from this folder we extracted. Next, we can view the README file, which shows that you can run ComfyUI either in CPU or GPU by clicking on their corresponding BAT files. If you have installed other interfaces for AI models like Automatic 1111 or Forge UI, you can use the same models you have already downloaded by modifying this extra underscore model underscore paths .yml.example by right-clicking on it and opening it with a text editor. We can add extra paths here for ComfyUI to use, so you don't need to download models again if you already have. If you never downloaded models before and have no idea what all of these folders are, I'll go through the main ones. ComfyUI has a Python embedded folder, which is where all the Python dependencies and libraries are housed, and you typically don't have to worry about this. The update folder is where you can update ComfyUI by double-clicking on these BAT files. For the most part, you will only ever have to click update underscore ComfyUI.bat. But if you read the little preview here, you can also update the Python dependencies if your ComfyUI is messed up, and that tends to fix things. The main ComfyUI folder has all these folders, but the main ones you will look at are the custom nodes, models, and output. Custom nodes and models we'll talk about later, but the output folder is where all your generations will go by default. So let's fire up ComfyUI by clicking on the run underscore NVIDIA underscore GPU.bat file. This will open command prompt window, which shows all of what ComfyUI is doing and some of the advanced information about ComfyUI setup. It may download some additional required files, so your first time or any time after an update, it might take a few minutes depending on your internet speed. And now we have ComfyUI installed. Let's take a look at some workflows.
Now that we have ComfyUI installed, let's go ahead and generate our very first image. So this is what ComfyUI looks like when it pulls up by default, and we need to actually load in our very first model in order to generate images. Now, to download models, the easiest way is to do so through the ComfyUI Manager, which you can find by going to their GitHub page. The ComfyUI Manager is really useful because it lets you install models, custom nodes, and save and share workflows in a super easy to use interface. But in order to install the ComfyUI Manager, you first need to make sure that you have Git installed on your computer. You can do so by just going to the Git website and clicking on the version which works for your Windows setup. Git is used to download packages from GitHub, and since most of the nodes are already uploaded to GitHub, the way that the ComfyUI Manager works is by actually downloading them through Git commands. Next, once you have Git installed, you want to make sure to download this script file, which is install manager for portable version.bat. And you can do so by right-clicking on it and then hitting save link as. We want to make sure to save this inside of our ComfyUI portable directory. So I'm going to navigate to that here. And inside of the base directory where we see the other BAT files, I can go ahead and hit save. Next, I'm going to close out of ComfyUI that we already have open by just closing out of the command prompt and closing out of the tab. And then I'm going to click on the install manager for portable version.bat which is going to open up its own command prompt and start to download and install the ComfyUI manager. And just like that, it should be installed. So when we start up ComfyUI again with the run command, we should start to see a slightly different user interface. So here we have it loaded up again, and if your UI looks a little bit different, you may actually be using an older version of ComfyUI. So make sure that you also go into your update folder and click update comfyui.bat so you're using the latest version. One thing that you're going to notice is that the UI should look a little bit different for the newest version of ComfyUI, but also when we have the manager installed, we get this little button here, which we can click on, and that pulls up the ComfyUI manager menu. Now we can go ahead and download our very first AI model by using the model manager and then using the search features here. There are a bunch of different models, but I highly recommend that you start off with the checkpoint models because those ones will be packaged with the VAE and clip files, so you don't have to download a bunch of separate files. So to do so, we can click on type and then go to checkpoint, which is going to filter that entire list by just checkpoint models. Next, I'm going to type in Flux, and we should see two different options here, the Flux.1 dev model and the Flux.1 Schnell model. These are two different models made by Black Forest Labs, and depending on your GPU setup, you can use either or of these. I highly recommend using the Flux.1 dev model because that one tends to be the best for image generation. To install it, it's as easy as clicking install here. And if we were to check on the command prompt, we can see that it is downloading the Flux.1 FluxDev FP8 safe tensors, which is a pretty large file. It's 17.2 gigabytes, but that's going to have everything that we need to get started. Now, I'm going to let this run for a few minutes and let's check back in once it's finished. Once it's finished, the next thing to do is make sure that we restart our ComfyUI by closing out of it or hitting on the restart button and closing out and refreshing our browser. So here we have it installed and I'm restarting ComfyUI. So now that we have our model downloaded and installed, it should actually be in the right folder, which would be in our ComfyUI portable models folder under checkpoints. So when you first start up ComfyUI, it loads up this default workflow. And on the left-hand section is where we see this load checkpoint node. This is the node that lets us load in that checkpoint model that we just downloaded. So I'm going to select on Flux.1 dev fp8.safe tensors. The reason you're seeing a bunch of other models here is because we edited that models.yaml file earlier to include those extra paths from our earlier installs of Automatic 1111. Now, just by using their complete default settings, let's go ahead and run this and generate our very first image using Flux and ComfyUI. To do so, we can click in the top right-hand corner and hit Queue Workflow, which is going to go through the entire node setup until we get our final result. Whenever ComfyUI is working on a section of a node, it's going to highlight it in green, and we can also check on its progress by going over to the command prompt window and seeing exactly what it's doing. So we can see here it's using PyTorch attention, it's requested to load the Flux clip model, and it is loading here. One thing I have noticed is that if you are seeing that it is taking an extremely long time to first start up, it does help to actually go to the command prompt window and press enter on it. And you can kind of see that maybe it just refocuses that in case your window or your browser had not assigned it that attention. Another thing that you might notice as well is that the longest part of the entire process would be loading in your checkpoint model for the very first time. But afterwards, when you start generating images, as long as you haven't changed your checkpoint or those earlier initial settings, everything should come out much faster than your first time. And here is the first image that we've generated, which honestly does not look good at all. And the reason for that is because we're using the Flux model, but by default, the workflow that's given to you with ComfyUI is one that was made specifically for stable diffusion. But we can still get a really great result using this by just changing a few settings in the case sampler. The settings that we want to change is the CFG value from 8, and we want to change this to 1. This is a remnant of an older stable diffusion quality of using a classifier-free guidance scale, but this is not something that's needed in Flux, so we typically just turn this to 1, which pretty much turns it off. Another thing that we can change is the sampler name and the scheduler from Euler normal to instead Euler simple, which should give us a better performance out the gate. And with just those two simple changes, let's go ahead and hit Q and see how much different the final resulting image looks. And just like that, we have an actually decent looking image. It looks so much better than before. If we wanted to spend more time on this generation, we would change the step value from 20 to something like 35, which is just going to give it more iterations or more steps. If you want to check on the progress again, you can take a look inside of the command prompt window to see how fast it's running. And look at that, it's generated another image with even more detail than before. So this is a very, very basic workflow, but let's go into making some more advanced workflows, something that looks much better and actually allows you to do a lot more tweaking and fine tuning with your image. So there's a lot of ways to get workflows. There's a bunch of free ones online. On our Patreon, we have an entire collection of different drag and drop workflows. And our most advanced workflow is our V3 Ultimate Flux ComfyUI workflow. Here we have a page that houses all of our different workflows as well as all the additional files that you may need to download. So for this case, I'm going to click here to download the workflow. I can simply go to the ComfyUI workflow.json and then hit save. You can go ahead and just drag and drop in that JSON file that we just downloaded into the ComfyUI tab, and it should load it up immediately. You're going to get this red screen of death, which shows missing node types and all of this extra stuff that pops up, which looks super scary, but there's actually a really easy way to fix this. You're probably also going to see this if you've ever worked with any other workflow that you're finding online. So this is what the workflow looks like before we have any of the additional nodes installed. And in order to fix this, we need to go up to the ComfyUI manager here and then click on Install Missing Custom Nodes. This is going to bring up an entire list of the nodes that are used inside of this workflow. So I can go ahead and click on all of them here by selecting in the top left corner and then clicking install and letting it do its thing, which should take a few minutes. If you want to check on the progress, again, all of that is going to be inside of the command prompt here, which shows each of these nodes getting downloaded and installed. Once that's finished, you can click on restart and then hit OK, and that should restart the entire ComfyUI. When you're first loading ComfyUI after installing new custom nodes, it may download additional files as well, so allow yourself a few more minutes before thinking that everything is not working. And as you can see here, it is downloading all of the additional files as well needed for those nodes. If you find out later on that some of the nodes did not install properly, it's also helpful to check in on this command prompt window to see if there's any errors that pop up. So while this is downloading, I think it'll be helpful to actually go over the individual components of this workflow and what makes this one so much more advanced from the earlier one that we just looked at. If you take a look here on this Patreon page, it lists out some of the features of this one, which includes an upscale feature, a face detailer, canny and depth control nets, as well as a bunch of other features like LoRAs, prompt replacers, detail daemon, image dimensions, and mask options. If you ever worked with any other creative program before, like Photoshop or Illustrator, then you do know that different tools will help you fine-tune your image or make an image more to your liking. And by default, when using workflows that ComfyUI gives you, does not really give you so much control over your image. So that's what these different elements help you do. So for example, the detail daemon helps you add more details to your image. Mask options lets you do things like in painting so that you can add certain things to your scene or remove them from your scene. LoRAs help you make images look like a specific style or add very specific characters to a scene. For example, we've used this Studio Ghibli LoRA, which is up on our Civet AI page, to generate images like this. The face detailer is specifically helpful if you're generating photos of human faces because by default, some things may look a little bit wonky, like you may have weird teeth or weird hair or eyes. And whenever you have the face detailer turned on inside of this workflow, it's going to go through and specifically mask out the face and just focus on generating that section of the image, which is going to be super, super powerful for getting you to a point where your image actually looks realistic. So it has just finished installing everything from earlier, and it automatically reopens up a new tab with ComfyUI. And this time around, we should see that there are no missing nodes anywhere. So there's no red that shows up, which means that we're pretty much good to go, except there are a few things that we need to do to make sure that this actually works. Now, the way that this workflow is set up is almost like a book to where you read it from left to right, and in the top left-hand corner is going to be where all of your main loading settings are going to be. The first thing that we need to check on is our add-on sections. So by default, this has the upscaler, face detailer, and LoRAs turned on. Since we don't really have any LoRAs being used yet, we can go ahead and turn this off, which you can see actually turns it off right here inside of the workflow. So this is one of the more advanced features, being able to turn on and off sections of your workflow. One of the more advanced features, though, is making sure that you have your cami and depth control nets. So the way that these work when you turn them on is that they'll help you control your image into a specific look based on another input image. So for example, you pretty much only want to leave one of these on for a control net because when you add both of them, it does mess up your image a little bit. Canny is used for creating hard edges. So if you're working with things like a logo, that might be your choice. Depth, however, creates an entire depth map from the input image and then uses that to influence your generation. So let's go ahead and try this out here. So here I'm going to download an image from Final Fantasy and just drag and drop it into this load image section here. And you can see it loads the image right there. Now, all of this may look super, super daunting, but don't worry because it's actually super simple as long as you go from left to right. So as you can see here on the left-hand side, we have our step 1, and then moving forward, we have step 2, 3, and 4, and then 5. For step 1, this is the area where we want to load in our model, load in our images, and pick our settings. So first thing that we want to make sure to do is click on the flux1 dev fp8.safetensors file, which will be our image generation model. And then here I have an image from Final Fantasy, which again, if you wanted to use any picture, you can actually just go into another tab, find a picture that you like, and then it's as simple as dragging and dropping it onto this node, and you'll see that it loads it right there. The next section is for loading in LoRAs. So by default, if you guys don't have any LoRAs downloaded, you may want to go ahead and either make your own LoRA, which we have a full video on making a LoRA that looks like yourself, or we also have a LoRA that's trained on Studio Ghibli images, which you'll be able to find on our Civit AI page. So you should be able to find it by typing in Civit AI Studio Ghibli Black Mixture, but we'll also be leaving a link down in that description for you guys to get access to it. So whenever you're downloading a LoRA, you want to make sure to download it into the proper folder. So let's navigate to the ComfyUI install. And then within the ComfyUI folder structure, you want to go to Models, LoRAs, and then just save it right there. And that should be Studio Ghibli Flux.safetensors. So even though it's downloaded, it's not going to show up right away inside of the manager because we still have to refresh it so that it knows to actually look inside of those folders again. To refresh the manager, we can go up to the Edit tab and then click Refresh Node Definitions here, and you'll see it where it says Node Definitions Updated. Now when we look at the LoRA loader, it should say Studio Ghibli Flux and allow us to select that. If it doesn't work off the bat, you can go ahead and hit reload this page by refreshing your entire window, and it should look and work much better. Now, for the other sections of these, we don't actually have any LoRAs that we need. So I'm going to select on it, and then I'm going to press Control B, which is going to turn it off. That way, we're not influencing our image with absolutely nothing. Now, for this next step, since we do want to actually apply the control net depth, I'm also going to select here and press Control B, so that way it gets turned on. Now let's go ahead into our prompting area since we have all of our loaded images, all of our selections selected. And since this is a back photo, I can actually turn off the face detailer here. And let's type in a prompt, a man standing by a castle, illustrated in the style of Studio Ghibli. And let's go ahead and hit Q and see if everything works. Now, it looks like it has frozen here because this section is red, and that means that something is going wrong here because we don't actually have our ControlNet model installed. But we do see parts of this working properly, which does show up with a depth preview, and that's because this node here actually downloads and loads that depth model, but we don't have what is called a control net for this. So let's go back to a central hub here, which includes all of the different files that you can download. You can also just use the Flux depth control net here. It's going to take you to this link on Hugging Face by X Labs AI. Go to the files and versions here, and we want to make sure to download Flux depth control net v3.safetensors. This is a pretty big file at 1.49 gigabytes. The way to install this is to go over to where we installed our ComfyUI, then go to Models, ControlNet. We can just place it inside of our ControlNet folder here. So that took literally just a second to download, and let's go back now into our Load Depth ControlNet section. And then we can click on Edit Refresh Node Definitions to make sure that it updates. And here we can now see that the Flux Depth ControlNet v3.safetensors file shows up. And if we were to go ahead and hit Q on the workflow, it's now greened out and everything is working perfectly. So here we can see our image generated, and this is looking amazing. A cool thing about this setup is that we have it set with an image compare node. So if you have an input image and you generate an image, you can actually just hover over it to see a comparison between your input and your output. Now, for the upscaling section, we also need to load in an upscale model. So as you move forward, as you can see here to the upscaler, it did not upscale the image. And the reason for this is because we do not have an upscale model. There are plenty of upscale models online, but my favorite to use for stuff like this is the 4x foolhardy Ramakri model, which again, you can find by going over to our upscale models section here, and then just going and clicking on download. So here I'm going to download the 4x foolhardy Ramakri model, and then I can put it inside of my models, upscale models folder, and just hit save. Now, if we go back to the ComfyUI tab, refresh the node definitions again, and then hit Q on our workflow, we should see this time around after it finishes generating the image that it moves over to the upscale section. Now, if you're working on an image and you realize that you want to change a setting last minute, the way to do that is to click up here into the cancel current run button. That's going to stop it so that you're not using up your resources and allows you to change some of the settings. So one thing that I'm going to change here from what we did earlier is instead of leaving the denoise at 0.95, I'm going to change this to 1, which means that we're not using any of the original image at all in our next generation. And instead, all we're going to be using is just this depth preview. By default, the strength is set to 0.35 or about 35%. But for this generation, I'm going to crank it all the way up to about 80%, so zero 0.8. And then if you can see here in the section where it says 1, 2, or 3, this is our selector. So if you wanted to use what's called an empty latent, which is a brand new image with complete noise, you can do so with that. But if you wanted to use the image to image feature, then you select 2, or if you wanted to use an image plus a mask, then you select it with 3. Another thing that you might notice about this generation is that it is a 1:1 aspect ratio, whereas our input image was a 16:9. If you wanted to change your aspect ratio, we can do so by using the empty latent size selector here and changing it from 1:1 to 16:9. That way, when we generate the image, we should get more of this landscape look. Though by default, it did a really good job of having our character in the foreground and the castle in the background in a pretty similar stance as before. So let's go ahead and hit Q on the prompt and watch this work. And there we have it. We have a completely new generated image in the style of Studio Ghibli with our input image as our control net for depth. So this is looking pretty awesome, but you can kind of tell that some of the features and qualities of this is looking very, very rough. And the reason for this is because we have our control net turned super, super high, and it's not really allowing the AI model too much creativity in being able to experiment with some of these shapes. So it's almost an exact 1-for-1 with the form from our depth map, but it does not necessarily know exactly what it's looking at, except for whatever we have prompted. So since we didn't really prompt for a sword, it has just changed it into what looks like a cape or a cloak or something stiff on his back, though we do have some of the cool features of a Studio Ghibli character there. And now we can also see that the upscale model is also working because this part of the node section is running now. The way that the upscale model works is by breaking up the image into separate tiles and then working on those individual tiles and combining them back together at the end. We have a whole video about upscaling, which you can check out, as well as a whole workflow for just upscaling images so you don't have to generate them from scratch. And instead, if you have something that you already like but want it to be either revitalized or reimagined, you can use our workflow to do so there. And here we have the finished upscaled version of our image. So this one is also set up with an image compare node so that we can look at our previous generation compared to our next one. So this is looking much, much better. There's so many more details that get added in. Since we were very, very heavy with our control net, it does look a little bit rougher. Now, if we were to lower this value down to something like 35%, which was the default that we set it at, it should have us make a much more cohesive image, albeit not as strict on its form conforming to the depth map. And here we have the generated image, which looks much, much better. So we can see the castle in the background and our character standing here in the foreground. And let's give it a few more seconds to run through so that we can see what the upscaled image looks like at the end. And here we have our final upscaled image, which we can compare it to. So here you can see there's so much more details on this mountainside and this castle as well as even the lake and some of these foreground features. You can also see parts of the clothing get much smoother, and you can probably see parts of the head here looking a little bit messed up still, but that's normally why we leave our face detailer for the very end feature. So I wanted to show you guys a quick look at some of the more advanced workflows, because once you start messing with ComfyUI and wanting to tweak an image or either use an input image or use masks and all these different awesome features that are built in, that's really where the power of ComfyUI comes into play. Though there are some alternative options to where you're not working with a super huge complicated setup and doing a lot of fine tweaking on an image, and maybe you just want to have a little bit of fun with ComfyUI. For that, I'm going to show you another workflow where it's only about 5 nodes total, so not the 100 or so that are set up here. And that is our live portrait workflow. So I'm going to go back to our hub, which includes all of the workflows. And for this, even though it says advanced live portrait, the advanced section of this is just because the tool works in an advanced way with a lot of different awesome features. So I'm going to go ahead and download this one where it says Ultimate Live Portrait plus Webcam. And then we can go ahead, save it, and open it back up inside of our ComfyUI here. And it's going to say the same thing with missing nodes. In order to fix this, again, all we have to do is go over to the manager, install custom missing nodes, select all of them, and then hit install. Give it a few minutes, and then let's restart our ComfyUI by clicking here and then clicking on reboot the server. And we should see it updating here inside of this command prompt. So here we have this workflow loaded up, and because I'm filming right now, it's not going to allow me to use my webcam capture. So I'm going to turn this off by pressing Control B. And instead, I'm just going to go ahead and open up any example image like the Final Fantasy one that we had earlier. Now, if I hit Q on my prompt, I can now see that it has changed the facial expression on the image. So this is a really fun workflow for editing facial expressions and even animating the facial expressions as well. What's really cool is that you get all of these controls here, such as the blink amount, the eyebrows raising, the direction of the pupils, and even to make the character smile or do different mouth shapes like ooh, ah, and e. So let me go ahead and turn the smile all the way up. And then if I hit Q again on the prompt, we should see the face instantly change. Another really cool feature about this is if we change the Q from its regular mode into an instant mode, what that's going to do when we hit play is automatically continuously change it, so that way we can keep seeing these updates happen in real time while we're working on it. Yeah, and this looks very, very weird, but if we're using a more frontal image, it should work a little bit better. But you can already see how the face has instantly changed based off of our settings here. So as you can imagine, there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff that you can do with ComfyUI. If you guys enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy checking out this one where we talk about how to create images of yourself that look believable, realistic, and it's super easy and fun to do within ComfyUI. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope to catch you in the next one. All right, peace.